So, the Justice League movie just came out, right? And we've been waiting years ever since basically the Batman and Superman reboots kind of took over things. We started looking and going, hey, what exactly is going to happen with the Justice League? Because now suddenly that's back on the table. And I'll be honest, when I saw the Wonder Woman movie and I saw Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, I was actually very excited about it because Wonder Woman was the best character out of the lot. And in Batman versus Superman, she actually ended up pretty much taking out Doomsday. You know, yeah, there was a kryptonite spear and Superman sacrificed himself, whatever. Wonder Woman had Doomsday on the ropes. But all of that being said, it's important to kind of talk about the Justice League movie itself. Now, I'm going to talk about some different aspects just going right in. First, there's casting. I thought Jason Momoa was a good choice for Aquaman, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that I liked Jason Momoa in playing a similar character when he was on Stargate Atlantis. Now, of course, on that show, he was a very different character in many ways because he was kind of a simpleton, kind of a brute. But in Justice League, he is basically the same character. He's a big, strong, heroic guy, and, that's where the similarities kind of end. And a lot of that is unfortunately because of kind of Jason Momoa's acting, but also the writing and directing. He's a big, strong guy, and he has a deep, throaty voice. So people tend to want to cast him in a certain way. But even with that, when you take a look at Ezra Miller as the Flash, and you can't help but compare him to the other Barry Allen currently on television, and it's just not as good. First off, the costume that they made is not as good, but more importantly, the actor does not look the part. He looks more like sort of the actor that they got to play Spider-Man in the recent Spider-Man Homecoming and Captain America Civil War. So it was obvious that they were trying to go for that, making the Flash this younger guy who could kind of be the talkative one, the Spider-Man version of the character. And it basically feels like Diet Spider-Man, which is very unfortunate because the Flash is his own entity, and they really needed to write him as that. Now, the other characters are basically returning actors. Jeremy Irons plays Alfred, and they do a lot of the usual stuff that they do with Alfred in some of the Batman video games. What is it? Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and I think the other one is Arkham Knight. Anyway, the point is that it's like, okay, yeah, it's good, but is it great? I don't think so. That being said, there were characters where you could tell that there was originally going to be a lot more character development there, but it just isn't there. And I have to mention specifically Ray Fisher as Cyborg. That character does not get the character development that he needs. And I'm absolutely serious about that. Cyborg has a lot of depth to him. First off, he's a person of color. Secondly, he has this incredible power forced upon him through a tragic origin. He gets injured, and his father makes this cybernetic suit for him. And then he you can tell that there was originally going to be this sort of conflict within himself about how he felt about, suddenly being more machine than human, and finding that balance within himself. And I'm honestly wishing that they had given him his own movie first, much like they did with a lot of the Marvel films. And you can't help but compare these to a lot of the Marvel films, because you had the Flash on television, but it's not the same Flash. This Flash is completely different. You never had Aquaman. You never had Cyborg. You never had their solo vehicles. And I'm basically wishing that they had done what the writers originally intended to do, which was make the film in two parts. Originally, they were going to have Justice League Part 1, and then they were going to release Justice League Part 2 in 2019, which to me is a little bit out there because that's like so far away. That's 2 years. Even though it's like almost the end of 2017 at this point, that would still be over a year away. And that's just too long. I'm sorry. The fact is that they're able to produce these films in faster succession with the increase in ease of production on special effects. But they really sort of have dropped the ball with not developing these films fast enough in order to keep up with the Marvel franchises, which are getting produced by Sony, Fox, and Marvel Studios out of Disney, which means you've got three studios competing against one with Warner Brothers. And if Warner Brothers doesn't make back its money, it has a lot harder time putting more into the franchise. With Sony, Fox, and Marvel producing Marvel movies, you have an entirely different set of gains and losses to be withstood. And I've talked about this ad nauseum, so I won't bring it up again. That being said, I never liked Henry Cavill, or Cavill, however you pronounce it, as Superman. I know that he got cast by Zack Snyder and them in Man of Steel, but I could not stand it. I thought that it was a bad choice. He looked too much like Superman and not enough like Clark Kent when he was playing Clark Kent. And a lot of that does go back to what Tim Burton was developing for Superman by choosing Nicolas Cage, someone who was larger than life with all of these powers, but who could be very average looking if you saw him on the street. And the whole idea that they would, kind of nerd him up and make him look like someone at a science fiction convention actually worked as a concept. And then when they put like the costume on him, he would really transform, and it was just sort of part and parcel with everything. It was part of the transformation, and it was part of why nobody recognized him as Clark Kent, was because the costume made that much difference. With Henry Cavill, there is no difference. If you saw him walking down the street, you would say, that's Superman. And to a large degree, even with Christopher Reeve, that was the difference that he made when he played the part. And I do have to bring that up because it was one of the most iconic Superman portrayals. When he was Clark Kent, he put on a totally different air about himself. With Henry Cavill, you don't get that. And it just doesn't work, I'm sorry. So, putting that aside, I thought it was so weird that you had J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon, because I was just like, wait a minute. So you have the guy who plays Perry White, or not Perry White, J. Jonah Jameson. Sorry, totally mixed up my universes there. You have the guy who plays J. Jonah Jameson in the 2000s Spider-Man, playing Commissioner Gordon. Like, he did okay with it. He didn't do his usual job where he's acting and he's sort of playing that very brusque character, that very blunt character that he plays in a lot of his other roles. And the way that he talks is far more subtle. More like Commissioner Gordon sort of should be. But it just sort of felt like it was, hey, look, it's J.K. Simmons. So I felt kind of weird about that. But getting away from that, it's sort of important to talk about the storyline because this is a muddled mess. And it's another situation, much like with Suicide Squad, where I genuinely felt that there was this horrible influence from studio heads who wanted everything that was in Avengers or in Captain America Civil War. But the problem is that they hadn't bothered spending the time developing a lot of those characters. When you see Ant-Man in Captain America Civil War, you've already met Ant-Man in another movie, which was a very good movie. Not as good as it could have been, but still pretty good. Now, when you meet Thor in Avengers, you've already met Thor. Even if you don't really like Thor, you've met him. You've met Iron Man, and you're actually excited to see Iron Man come in. Now, Batman, unfortunately, with this Batman, we have met him in Batman v Superman, and it's not at all like the Christopher Nolan Batman. It's not close enough. This Batman is, how to put it, this Batman is basically Arkham City Batman. I'm not even kidding at this point. It feels like they wanted to borrow more from that incarnation than from the Dark Knight trilogy that Christopher Nolan made. Which is really unfortunate because the Dark Knight trilogy really did have this great influence and this great style. But it was its own story in and of itself. It was very much self-encapsulated. So you couldn't quite have the same feel without all of the additional development. That being said, they could have easily gone the route of having maybe some short animated features that were half an hour to an hour in length that would have developed the other characters more. You know, a Cyborg standalone film, a Flash standalone film, even if it was a short subject where it was just like one adventure. You could sell it as like Justice League Origins and sell it in one box set, or even just on one disc with some of the different adventures, and then at the end of the adventure with the Flash or with Cyborg, you have Batman approaching them. And this is just me talking a bit as a writer. Okay, when I write stories or when I speculate about what kind of things could work in storytelling, I kind of like to look at these elements. But with all that said, yeah, the villain is not compelling, and that is this film's biggest drawback. I do not care about the villain. I don't care about his plans. I don't know enough about him. And this is where slowing down the story into either a longer film or into a two-parter would have worked. You could have had this be a 2.5-hour film and taken the time to develop things, and it would have worked. And people will sit down and watch a 2.5-hour film. We watched long films like The Dark Knight Rises, and loved it. We yummed it up. And if I remember correctly, Watchmen was god-awful long, and people still watch that. But even with all that said, it's just important to kind of look at this and say, okay, what kind of storytelling could we actually have had? And I know that direction kind of passed hands because apparently Zack Snyder had to take time off the film starting in May in order to deal with the loss of his daughter. I will not fault him for that. Frankly, I don't consider Zack Snyder a very competent director, but that has nothing to do with the death of his daughter. I hope she rests in peace, and I hope that he and his family have nothing but the easiest time in their grief, because it is so hard losing a child. I can't pretend that I don't mourn for his loss, because it's awful. But with that being said, they passed it over to Joss Whedon, and they didn't give him enough creative control. Because here's how I look at it. Zack Snyder is not a very good director. I don't think he ever has been. But Joss Whedon is generally a pretty good director. He knows how to bring the fun out of a lot of things. And at no point while watching the Justice League, even with jokey dialogue inserted in, do I feel like I'm having fun on an adventure with the Justice League. A lot of plot points seem very rushed. And in the sort of first climactic battle of the story, spoiler at this point, Superman is resurrected, and he doesn't remember who he is, so he starts fighting the Justice League. Well, this would be okay, except that not one member of the Justice League is able to stop him. Lois Lane is able to sort of snap him out of it, but it gets extremely frustrating when you have Aquaman and Cyborg and Wonder Woman all attacking him, and he's just standing there as if it's nothing. Superman is very powerful, but Aquaman and Wonder Woman are roughly equal in strength to Superman. I believe Wonder Woman is as strong as Superman, and I believe so is Aquaman, but I could be wrong. The point is, all three of these characters are attacking him. Superman would not be able to stand up to it. Secondly, Bruce Wayne has kryptonite. Batman always has kryptonite. This is a running joke, but it's true, because Batman doesn't know if he's going to be taking on a Kryptonian at some point, and it's good to have at least a small piece of kryptonite because it cripples Kryptonians in rapid succession. It is an advantage that he can wield responsibly. He keeps it in a lead-lined container and takes it out only when necessary to take out a bad guy, specifically a Kryptonian, or in some cases Superman if he's been mind controlled in some way. But even with all that, you have to stop and consider how much they were trying to take a lot of points from the Avengers on this. Because it felt rushed. It felt like they were trying to make this into one encapsulated story that, just was trying to be Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron all in one. And it's like, no. Stop trying to be Marvel. I'm not even kidding. The Steppenwolf character is completely uncompelling. There is nothing unique about him. He is completely computer generated, which makes him just right there in the uncanny valley. You do not feel like this is an actor who is portraying a part. You don't feel like this is anything. It's just pixels on a screen. And it just ends up feeling like a cutscene from a video game, and that's a pain in the butt. They made the armor way too detailed. I mean, we're talking Baroque levels of detail and ornateness. And that's a point where it's like, okay, you're trying to show off how good it looks in high definition, except that nobody cares. One of the things about really good costume design is that you don't have to see every little detail in order to get the feel that this is a good and practical costume. You just end up sort of feeling like Steppenwolf is dressed up specifically to look good on an HD television. You know, oh, this will look great in the Blu-ray for the extended cut. It's like, I don't want to have to see the extended cut in Blu-ray in order to enjoy this film. I should be able to watch it on a 13-inch television and still get a lot out of it as a story. The dialogue should be compelling, but generally I just felt like the characters were saying things because this is the part of the film where they're supposed to say this. And none of it felt very momentous. There wasn't any real gravitas to a lot of the lines. And I realize that's kind of nitpicking, but it's true. You know, when we're watching this, I should be drawn in by the dialogue, the actors, their interactions, everything. And this is part of the reason why I say that Zack Snyder is not very good. Because he simply isn't. I feel like Joss Whedon, had he been given complete control over the film and been able to influence a lot more of the writing, there would have been some fun there. But instead it feels like Aquaman is Thor, and, Wonder Woman, what would she be? Wonder Woman is kind of the Hulk, if you follow. Or, if I had to go out on a limb, Wonder Woman could also be the Vision. But that's just kind of the feel you get for it, is like, oh, we're substituting in DC characters for your Marvel characters. And putting them in a Marvel movie, except it's not a very good Marvel movie. And I'm more of a fan of DC than I am of Marvel. I like the DC characters way better than I like Marvel characters. So where to continue from there? Well, it's not easy. Because we really have to think about what there is in this film that we can actually take away. And unfortunately, you just don't get the feel of this being a Justice League movie. I mean, okay, here are my feelings on the Trinity of DC, as portrayed in this film. Superman is just given way too much in terms of his powers. You know, there is no struggle, there is no vulnerability, there is no, oh, I have to rescue the people because I care about the people. And by the way, there are some people randomly shoved in the middle of this climactic battle where this giant machine that's going to destroy the world, they're just out in the country and there's this giant machine there all of a sudden, and they're driving away from it in a truck. I'm just like, ugh, really? We're going that route where there's randomly people out here and you can't just, like, get them out of there to safety because they're trying to outrun this wave of something. I don't know. But then on top of that, if we're going to talk about the Trinity, I have to talk about Wonder Woman first and foremost, because she's really my favorite in this current franchise. Wonder Woman is really good when they focus on her. When they focus on her, the film basically picks up and has the pacing and action that the film needs. Because they allow you to stop, take a moment, and digest. Everything else in terms of Batman basically feels like you're watching Arkham City or the Arkham Knight and all that other stuff. because the Batmobile has this special ability that lets it crawl instead of rolling, where crawling might be more advantageous somehow, which really doesn't make sense because the Batmobile is able to roll along in many different rough terrains. That's kind of its point. But they give it this ability to crawl at some point. It's really kind of weak. And the Batplane is likewise basically something out of Arkham Knight. It's not a good feeling plane. None of the Gotham City scenes with all of the vehicles feel like it's actually Batman. It just feels like you're watching Ben Affleck as Batman from the Arkham games. And I'm like, if you're going to do it this way, why not just do it completely CGI? You have a CGI villain. You have several characters augmented with CGI anyway. Why not just go the full route? I mean, you've already got the character models from, what is it, Injustice and Injustice 2? You've got the character models all the way around. If you wanted to do it CGI, there's nothing stopping you. And you could probably do it faster, but more importantly, they wouldn't have had to take all of the time to do a CGI erasure job on what's his name? Henry Cavill's mustache that he grew for another film. Apparently, in post-production, they actually had to spend money surgically removing the mustache and giving him an animated upper lip because he could not be bothered to shave it for this role. So, yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a film that was given so little priority that the guy playing Superman could not even be bothered to shave his mustache. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's kind of just how everything feels. It all feels like it could have just been a little bit better had they done just a little bit different or done something a bit more. And unfortunately, I think that this will lead to no further Justice League films. And that is a crying shame because we really could have had something here. For the fans, for the franchise, for the company that produces it, we could have had something. And unfortunately, we don't. It feels in a lot of ways, and Red Letter Media pointed this out, that this film could have been produced in the mid-90s in terms of a lot of its plot development. It is so vapid and underdeveloped in a lot of ways and rushed that I'm wishing that it had started development in 1996 back when they were producing Superman Lives before they finally got into filming. Like, they were all in pre-production on this. They had art designs, they had story rewrites. They were ready to produce a new Superman film that was going to feature the death of Superman as well as the Justice League, and it was going to lead to a Justice League film in the coming years. But so many films bombed at that time. The Matrix was a complete fluke for Warner Brothers, and it really revived their company, despite the fact that it was a very big budget film. But films like Wild Wild West, 187, several other films at the time that had a lot of star power and a lot of talent put into them did not make money. So, with that being said, it was hard feeling like you were satisfied by this film when so much better could have been done. And unfortunately, I kind of feel that way about most of the Man of Steel universe stuff. You feel satisfied by the Christopher Nolan Batman films because they bother to take you on a journey. Nolan is himself a storyteller at heart. He works hard at crafting the story and making it interesting for the viewer. He wants to tell you a story, and he manages it very well by adding in only as much detail as you need. Nothing more, nothing less. I feel like with Zack Snyder, it ends up lacking a lot. You get some really nice musical touches from Danny Elfman when he reuses some of the musical points from the 1989 Batman film. So in terms of musical direction, this film is actually fairly good, but you can't credit Zack Snyder with that. When you actually look at the writing and the story, it's just not a very well put together film. In terms of a lot of the casting, I've already made my complaints, but I really have to latch onto this, that they should have made the Flash older. They made him way too young. Cyborg can be young because Cyborg was young, and technically, he's never going to age. He's never going to get any older because his flesh is kind of trapped in its own way. But the Flash, they can make older. They could make him into an older person who's like maybe, I don't know, his late 20s, early 30s. Instead, it feels like he's a teenager. And that's a problem, because even on the television show, they make sure that you feel like, yeah, the Flash is in his 20s, but he's not a kid. He's not naive or stupid. He's not emotionally reactive too much. He kind of takes things and thinks things through. With all that said, I've talked a bit about the villain, but that's part of the problem. I can't really talk much about the villain because it doesn't feel like there is one. It feels like he's too much of a stock villain number 3 from this value bin barrel of villains. And he's supposed to be this military officer from Apocalypse under Darkseid. And he's supposed to have all of these different monsters under him. And apparently, he's Darkseid's uncle. But I just don't feel like, this is the character that you need. First off, Steppenwolf is very obscure. I had never heard of him. That's how bad it is. And there are other DC villains from Apocalypse that we are familiar with. I'm almost feeling like they could have gone with virtually anyone, and it would have felt better. For instance, and this is just my impression, I feel like they could have done a whole subplot element involving refugees from Apocalypse, like Mr. Miracle, and sort of his cadre of characters coming in and, sort of saying, like, you've got to stop Steppenwolf, and then they can tell everyone about, who Steppenwolf is in relation to Darkseid. Instead, we get this very weird flashback that basically makes these mother boxes into the Infinity Stones, where they're capable of great power in transforming the fabric of the planet and into, all the... It's like, this is too much too soon. Last film that we saw, we had, the last film that we had all of these characters in. I'm leaving out Wonder Woman because that was a solo film that just involved her. It didn't involve Justice League characters. But the last one that we had Justice League characters in, with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, we had Lex Luthor battling them with Doomsday and all that. It's like, stick with that. Don't go too far too soon. Don't go with, it's destroying the world. And make it like this gargantuan thing with these armies and the sky turning red and everything. build up to it. It's a very important element of storytelling. Secondly, if you have multiple characters and you want us to care about those characters, take the time to develop them from where we are introduced. In Batman v Superman, we get little brief clips of each one, and that's it. In this film, we get a little scene of Batman meeting the different characters. And it's just not as compelling as it could be. I feel too much, as I said, that each individual story could have been told in, let's say, a half hour. You could have even had a separate half-hour story solely dedicated to Steppenwolf, where he is dispatched by Darkseid from Apokolips specifically to take over Earth. That I would have felt okay with. It would have strengthened the characters. It would have been a separate film. You could have done it completely in animation, whether CGI or two-dimensional traditional hand-drawn, whatever you like. But it would have worked. It would have lent something to that universe and started the character development early on. And as I said, at the end of each of the hero stories, you could have had Batman walking up to them, had it voiced by Ben Affleck and all the other actors, and it would have worked. It would have made something more to help boost this, but we aren't dealing with that. Unfortunately, it makes it a lot harder for us as DC fans to really say why we love this particular universe of heroes. Because they don't give it, well, pardon the pun, they don't do it justice. And it's true. Cyborg has this whole time with the Teen Titans. He's the youngest member of the Justice League, the newest member. Prior to that, I think the newest member was the Flash. And then you had Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. They could have built on that. You know, we've already had our Justice League stories told in animated form. We have whole stories, whole universes already constructed, well made, with excellent acting done on the part of the cast. And really good animation done. So you feel like there's this already existing universe that's been well made. This is compared to a lot of the crap that we saw with Marvel television adaptations, with various animated forms and whatnot. And it was always a huge problem because you had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. That was garbage. It was so cheap. And then you had the 90s Spider-Man with the CGI city that he would swing through. And that one was always a previously on Spider-Man. This and this and this and this. And it was just trying too much to be this ongoing serial where it really needed to be encapsulated stories. Because otherwise, you quickly lost your place and didn't know what the heck was going on. But then on top of that, you had X-Men, where it was exactly the same problem. Previously on X-Men, this and this and this and this. And then you come to the story and it's like, So it's always a bit of a headache. And yes, the DC Arrowverse shows have the same problem, but they still focus on there being a lot of self-encapsulated stories within the episode you're watching. It has a soap opera structure, yes. I will not try and defend that because I don't like it. But the soap opera structure works for the purposes of the storytelling. It makes it formulaic as all hell and quite boring after a while, so that you're just kind of skipping through a lot of scenes of tense dialogue. But the important thing is, you still get a sense of what you're watching, who you're watching, and everything with that. So when you're watching Legends of Tomorrow, you get a feel for what you're watching. When you're watching Supergirl, you get a feel that, okay, this episode is dealing with these people, this character, all that. So you end up feeling a lot better about it. In fact, one of the more recent episodes of Supergirl where they go back home to visit Mom after a really upsetting ordeal in a previous episode, you're feeling for the characters. And you have a lot of the story taking place in flashback with a couple of younger actresses playing the parts for, this kind of little small town adventure for Supergirl and her sister. So it ends up feeling okay. But here's my thing about it. A lot of the feel that you get there is incredibly different from what you get in this Justice League movie. You don't feel the compulsion to watch and see where these different characters are going because you don't get the character development. You don't get the dialogue that makes you want to watch more. And the more you watch, the more you feel like this is just kind of wasting your time, unfortunately. They had the budget, the special effects, the actors, the costumes. They had it all together. And the entire thing, the entire project, really hinged on one vital element, and that is the plot. If you don't have a good story, if you don't have a good plot or decent character arcs, then you really need to go back and redraft the script into less of a mess. Simplify. Reduce it down. At one point in the very final climactic battle with Steppenwolf, which is basically going right up until the end of the movie, and I'm not even kidding. It's like a few minutes before the movie ends. And that's just incredibly frustrating when you really need a denouement for that kind of film with that many characters. But at one point in this climactic battle, you have all these different characters being cut back and forth to, and you cannot tell where they are in relation to one another. I'm not even kidding. In the Avengers film, and this is important to make this distinction, you know where they are in relative position to one another. Let's just take a look mentally back at Avengers. Just the initial one. Marvel's The Avengers, right? You have them fighting around New York City. And you might not be able to tell exactly where they are in relation to one another, but you know that Captain America is on the ground, Hulk is bouncing around between buildings, Thor and Hawkeye are up on top of the buildings or up in the sky, and Iron Man is flying in between the buildings and up in the sky. Loki is up in Stark Tower, looking around and laughing with glee. So you kind of know where they are roughly in approximate area to one another. And occasionally they do a thing where one character will be looking at the other, or you'll see the other character in the background, behind things. And it works. You know roughly where they are, so everything kind of holds together. In Age of Ultron, they're at different parts of the city, yes, but some of the characters are at the edge of the city as it's flying up into the sky. Some are in the very heart of the city. Some are, in relative proximity to one another. Some are a little bit further spread out. So you're working on this. You're able to basically follow where everyone is because you see them in the same scene together. Now that being said, I do like the final sort of climax in one particular aspect, and that is this. Wonder Woman gets the final blow. Steppenwolf has this staff. Oh, gee. This staff helps him control all of these bad monsters that are flying around in a swarm. I wonder if we destroy this staff with Wonder Woman's magical sword, will this stop all of the bad guys and send them home? Yes. Yes, it does. So even though I love that Wonder Woman got the final blow because Wonder Woman is totally awesome, I got extremely frustrated that as soon as you destroyed this one thing, you struck this one blow, all of the monsters suddenly decided to dogpile on Steppenwolf, and then they all get sucked away in a portal. So let's just think about that for 1 second. That's dumb. That is too easy a resolution. So instead of doing that, you could have done any number of different things. And instead they decided to do that. Yeah, that's kind of frustrating to say the least. But getting back to what I mentioned before, the denouement, it is so incredibly lazy. You have a voiceover talking about how wonderful superheroes are, and then they end with, if you want to look for them, just look up in the sky. And it's like, that is so lazy. You have a voiceover over the different characters kind of smiling as they go back to their lives and they're being heroes in their different places, and it's like, this is supposed to be like the end of the Avengers. Remember how awesome that was? And it's like, no, this is not the end of the Avengers, because in the end of the Avengers, you felt good about it. And they took their time for it. And they talked about how the people appreciated all that they had done. Here, you get like one little shot of the family that was trying to drive away in this beat-up old truck. And then that's about it. It's not satisfying as a conclusion. You don't feel like you've been taken on this wonderful adventure with these superheroes. You don't feel like you spent your time well. You end up just kind of feeling robbed. Like you could have spent that time doing almost anything but watch this movie, and it would have been a better use of your time. And this is me talking. I love DC. I love Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash. I like these characters. And they completely screwed the pooch on this one. They completely botched it. And I like these characters enough to sit there and watch their movies and really get a lot out of it when it's well written. But this was not well written. They did not have compelling dialogue or scenes that really made me feel good about watching it. Like, hey, I can see that they're really bonding as a team. No. Most of it is just blah, 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 blah. I'm not feeling for them. I'm not getting anywhere in terms of developing a connection with them. And I already like the actors. I like Ben Affleck. I like Jason Momoa. I like a lot of these actors who are in these roles. But I'm incredibly frustrated largely because you had too much studio influence trying to say, make it more like the Avengers. No, make it more like the Avengers. We need to Avenger it up. And it's like, okay, but Justice League is not the Avengers. That isn't how it works. You can't just make something more like another thing, like they did with Suicide Squad becoming more like Guardians of the Galaxy. You can't just do that. And the more that I kept seeing advertisements with no mention of plot, no mention of story, just showing the heroes looking cool with some kind of pop song over it and showcasing the special effects, I felt like, oh, this is going to be so bad. It's going to be a train wreck, isn't it? And it was. They had so much going into a lot of the scenes. The scenes were decently constructed in terms of, like, actual location filming, but unfortunately, it just feels like they were trying too hard. They were trying too hard to make this an Avengers movie, and they were trying too hard to make this everything that those films were in multiple chapters, right? Like you had Captain America Civil War, that was a separate film from Age of Ultron and a separate film from Marvel's The Avengers. You had a different feel for each one. In every story, the characters have a different character arc. They're all working through some different things. That's what makes the stories work. The characters, the stories are about people. The people are the characters. The characters have a journey. That journey takes place over an arc. Sometimes it occurs between different characters. Like Aquaman and Superman might, or not Superman, Aquaman and Batman might not like each other at first, but eventually they become friends. You see that sort of, but you don't quite get the same feel as if they had really gone for it. At the end of Batman v Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman are friends. And at the end of Wonder Woman even looks more fondly on Batman than she did at the beginning. So with all that said, what could they have done to make this better? Well, the fact is, make it into either a two-parter or do all the prequel stuff in half an hour to an hour format, heck, 45 minutes. Anywhere in that length would have worked. Take care of all of that build-up beforehand, and then keep your Justice League movie more encapsulated. Keep it as a neat, tidy little story with the characters going on different journeys. Okay, you've got these different boxes that Steppenwolf is going after. Let's have it actually explained in the story. You've got these different mother boxes? Okay, fine. Explore it. But make that the purpose of the story. Then get to him putting the mother boxes together because you weren't able to stop him. Everyone will have seen the shorts, so now we can put those characters together in this setting. We already kind of like them. And we've already seen a little bit of their journey, a little bit of their character arc. Now we get to see them with our other heroes that we've seen in the other films, and it's all coming together. Now they're here to stop Steppenwolf. Okay, this could work. But instead, we get treated to a real mess. I mean, a real tangle of this story that, honestly, I wish Carrie Fisher was still alive for so many reasons, but mostly just so that she could rework this script into something workable. Into something where people could actually watch it and enjoy it. With that said, Justice League, how do I want to rate it? I'll give it a 3 out of 5 because it had so much potential and it just lost so much with me. I'll give it a rewatch at a future time and see if I don't feel a little differently, but in my initial reaction, it's just not up to par. Thanks for watching. If you want to, please like, subscribe, or leave a constructive and respectful comment below. And if you feel so inclined, please donate to my Patreon campaign. Username ClaudaYT. Thanks. Bye-bye.